So just like we spoke a little bit about how you may divide and sector out your interior zones inside of your building, um, the rules pretty much apply in the same way to the exterior, at least when the big picture is concerned. Um, this is an image of a landscape just outside a large building, obviously, but then when you focus on the landscape a little bit, it is that exterior is zoned as well. You can tell that there is outdoor rooms that are zoned out, smaller outdoor rooms in that location. Circulation that cuts through. Circulation is always a different zone than a than a room that you might sit in or rest inside of. Then even the landscape itself is zoned differently. You have short landscape zones, and you have tall landscape zones. You have buffeting and buffering landscapes, hedges that maybe separate an area being used recreationally versus a functional space on the other side. From there, now that we understand a little bit that the exterior can be zoned out just like an interior would, let's look at some other images that come up as examples. This is another image in which you clearly have circulation zones, then you have seating zones, and then you have zones on the short landscape where you can actually sit down, have a picnic that's separated from the other zones with semi-taller landscapes. The geometry, again, all the examples that I'm showing you, that I will be showing you, are more disciplined landscape that are in contrast to maybe an English garden or something that's a little bit more less disciplined with its line work. Let's take a look at other landscapes that are zoned a little bit. And here's one, for example, that is also disciplined and landscaped. And it's consistent with the geometries that we're working on with the hillside retreat. You have your squares for maybe a little stage outside. You have squares and rectangles again for landscapes, rectangles for benches, rectangles for trees, and walls that are rectangles also that are born from the ground. Different patterns in the hardscape that you can see all along. This is quite consistent with our hillside retreat, and it's also a disciplined landscape. Now, landscape is divided into two things. Let me define that a little bit. Landscape is basically the shape of the land, but at the same time it could be soft land or it could be hard land. For example, if you look at here inside this planter, that's maybe I would define that as softscape. Softscape is something that is a live plant, and then outside of it you have decking, you have tile, you have benches. That's the hardscape. That's your paving, your decking. It's something that is not alive necessarily. We can take a look at that really briefly right here that we made in AutoCAD. So the major part of it is landscape, and the landscape is divided into a softscape and then a hardscape. Your softscape might be tall trees, your might be medium shrubbery and hedges, and then short grasses. And then your hardscape could be wood decking, stone or tile pavers, be concrete slabs, so on and so forth. So that's how I would divide up my landscape into soft and hard. Let's move back on to the some of the image examples that may be consistent with our projects. Here's a landscape, again, that's a little bit consistent with the architecture right here, maybe. You've got softscape, you've got hardscape around that with gravels, got tall shrubbery, and then short grasses, geometries. There's another larger example on a larger scale. You've got a zone that is hardscaped, and a zone that is softscape for the most part. And the geometry is again disciplined, and it almost seems like it's on a partially on the grid that might be consistent with the architecture around it, and we'll look at that a little bit more in some other images as we move in. One of my favorite images that is consistent with our project is perhaps this one. You have decking outside, and then you can see how the planters that are solids are basically subtracted from the wood decking, and you would see how the planter is also subtracted from the wood decking. Part of the planter is an area that you can sit on, part of it is got plants in it, it's planted, and another one that is fully a bench, and the back of it is planted. Softscape, hardscape, planters, and gravel on one side, all part of the total landscape. Another image of a landscape that is also consistent with the architecture. The building, architecture of the building has horizontal lines right along it. And the landscape is also continuously parallel to that as it folds up, and it's also parallel and horizontal. We've got hardscape in between the softscapes, some a little tall, some very short, and the benches consistent with that as well. This is an interesting image in which you show you the subtraction of your steps going up to an elevated pad, and it is zoned, that pad is also zoned between disciplined landscape right there and a little kind of outdoor living room on one side and a little eating area on the other side. And the circulation is zoned separately, all on one side. So there's a nice discipline to that one as well. Here's another one that shows a little bit of seating actually subtracted from the landscape, also consistent with our project. Something to think about. One of my favorite images here actually is perhaps this one. The landscape, again, is based on a grid. It has discipline in it. You see softscape variations in hardscape. So as a person is walking along that landscape, you can kind of recognize the zone between an area where people might sit and hang around versus transitional areas that separate the sitting and lounging areas versus the walking areas, people transitioning from one area to the next. Another quick example of building geometry that feeds back into the site landscape. This is a building geometry. This is DNA Architecture of Barcelona. The building geometry is in the same language in the way the landscape down on the ground level is treated. Another little quick example here is the building geometry, again, is feeding into and informing the landscape as it is planted with taller scapes and then much taller scapes, bridging wood decking elements. But again, there's a discipline to it, and it's born of and from the architecture. So, some quick other examples of disciplined landscapes. And maybe we'll terminate on this image right here, where the line work is continuous from a building as well, but the material inside of it, inside of that grid, is a little bit different. Okay.